It is indeed ironic that justice for Malaysians will hopefully be found in September in a court in Paris. Hopefully. William Bordon was supposed to come in and explain to us about what the case was about and what we might find out. Cynthia has said enough about it, but I just want to talk about another side of the whole French saga. The purchase of Scorpion submarines in 2002 is not just about the payment of $550 million in corrupt payments to Malaysian politicians and perhaps also to some French politicians. It is also about why Altantuya was murdered. And that's the question I think all of us are waiting to have answered one day. The murder of Altantuya is supposed to have been solved in the trial that has been concluded. 2 policemen, 1 inspector, 1 corporal, Corporal Azila and Serul, are now convicted as the persons who have killed her. Now, all of us know, and this is something you don't need to go to university to get a law degree to understand. All of us know that these 2 persons did kill her. I think that's obvious to the whole country. It's obvious to the whole world. It is obvious to all of us that these 2 people were simply the gun that was used to kill her. The key question, and this is the question everybody talks about in coffee shops all over Malaysia, is who pulled the trigger? And this is the question that should have been asked right from the day the investigation was opened, right from the day the prosecution was considered, and all the way through the trial. Any intelligent, objective, or unbiased judge would have been asking that question. Yes, you killed her. Yes. Who asked you to kill her? That was the question. And that question, ladies and gentlemen, we know from the whole process of the trial, that is the question that should have been asked all the way. But instead, what do we see? We see a drama being played from day 1 to end of the trial, where everybody is avoiding answering, or not answering, asking that very question. That was the wayang that was done during the trial of these 2 gentlemen for the murder of Altantuya. You even had, some of you will remember, when Altantuya's friend, a lady called Miss Burma, started talking about the photograph that she saw, that Altantuya showed her. The photograph that showed Razak Baginda, you remember who Razak Baginda was, sitting together with Altantuya and together with a gentleman who is now the Prime Minister of Malaysia in a restaurant in Paris. She said, Altantuya showed me this photograph. And then what happens in court? Everybody jumps up to object. No, now normally, okay, this would perhaps, in this sort of situation where the prosecution witness is saying something prejudicial, you might expect the defense to object. But here, not just the defense, the prosecution objected, the defense objected, then the judge also objected. So nothing more was allowed to be said about the photograph. And this is one of the many examples in the whole trial where you had this script written and faithfully followed, so that the most important question relating to that entire episode, who directed Corporal Cyril, Inspector Azila, to go and shoot and blow up Altantuya? Nobody wants to ask that question. This is what we hope may emerge in the French investigation. We hope that some facts will come to light that will help Malaysians get the answer to that question. Because that's an obvious question. And why is it a key question? Because it involves people in the highest positions of power in our country, ladies and gentlemen. If they were involved in the murder of this Mongolian lady, then justice must be done. Not just for the family of that Mongolian lady, but so that Malaysians will know that our institutions work and our institutions ensure justice to all. You know the kind of questions that should have been asked, which were never asked during the investigation. The links that point, the links that show. I'm not here to accuse, like what Gobind said. Gobind did something quite drastic in Parliament. Gobind Singh Dev stood up and said, "You are a murderer." He pointed to the gentleman sitting on the first seat, you know who I'm talking about. And he said, "You are a murderer," as he left. And for that he was suspended for 1 year in Parliament. I don't want to go so far. But I can tell you, there are enough connections between Prime Minister Najib and the murder of that Mongolian lady. There's so many connections that he has a lot of questions to answer. Any objective investigator would have had a number of questions to ask Prime Minister Najib about his connection with that lady. I just want to take a few minutes and I want to share some of that with you. To share with you the unanswered questions, the unasked questions first of all. The questions were never asked when they should have been asked. And that's why these questions are still not answered. And these are some of them. Of course, the first question would be, does that photograph exist? Because we have not seen the photograph. It's true. But I can share this with you, ladies and gentlemen. The father of Altantuya, Mr. Sharibu, has told me he has seen that photograph. He has seen it. Miss Burma in court on oath said she saw the photograph. There's two people who have seen the photograph. Surely the police should be asking all the related people, does this photograph exist? A French journalist called Arnaud Dubout wrote in a very well-known French newspaper called Libération. He described this episode of the photograph. He explained about how the family handed over documents, including that photograph, to the honorary consul for Mongolia, Dato' Said Abdul Rahman. We had an honorary consul in Mongolia. For some reason, at that point, they trusted this gentleman. And this gentleman then handed over those documents to the police. This is what Arnaud Dubout wrote in this article in Libération. He described it all in detail. And that was not years ago, that was just last year, 2010. And everybody all over the world has read that article. And I'm sure the police in Malaysia read it. I'm sure the Prime Minister has read it. I'm sure Dato' Said Abdul Rahman has read it. And one would have expected a response. Even some kind of response. But at the very least, a denial. Do you know the response? There's silence. Nobody is denying that version by the French journalists. Nobody is saying the photograph does not exist. And do you know what it means if that photograph exists? It means that when our Prime Minister has been going around the country for the last 2 or 3 over years, every time he was asked about, do you know Altantuya? His answer is, I swear on the Quran, I never met her, I never knew her. That was his answer. And that's a very important question now for all of us. Is our Prime Minister telling the truth when he said that? And if he's not telling the truth, then what are the implications of that? Those are serious questions. This is just the first part. If I'm an investigator, I would have a lot to ask the Prime Minister. But the interesting thing, ladies and gentlemen, about the Altantuya investigation, you will find, is that the police didn't even record or didn't ask these questions of the Prime Minister. Now, this is just one, the photograph. Let me share with you just a few other connections. And then I'll leave you with a final question. The other obvious connection, of course, is Razak Baginda. But that's obvious, yeah? Razak Baginda is a very close advisor to the Prime Minister, and he was having a relationship with Altantuya. Fine. So that's a connection. Now, when Razak Baginda was arrested for investigation, the Prime Minister is sending him SMSs, and this is proven, this is not challenged, telling him, I will see the IGP, stay cool, we'll solve this. Why is the Prime Minister sending messages like that by SMS to Razak Baginda when he was arrested and held for investigation for the murder of Altantuya? What is the connection between the two that the Prime Minister felt obliged to do that? Another question. Don't you think if you were the police officer investigating this murder, you would have questions to ask of the Prime Minister?